Hello, and welcome to Kentucky Wide, a podcast production of the Fraser Kentucky History Museum. I'm Mick Sullivan.
And I'm Sarah Jemerson. Many folks in our area are eager for the return of the touring production of Hamilton to a Kentucky stage later this month. So we thought we'd look at one of the biggest connections to Kentucky in that story, Aaron Burr.
This episode was written by Tori Kennedy, and it looks at another controversial aspect in Burr's life, leading to charges of treason in Kentucky. Joseph Hamilton Daveiss, a Kentuckian and the namesake of Davis County, brought the charges. But as you'll see, Burr had a way of coming out on top against anyone with Hamilton in their name.
So let's jump in. If you had asked any of the original founding fathers who they believed would become a household name to future generations, there's a good chance none of them would have said Alexander Hamilton. That isn't to say Hamilton did not have a lasting legacy and place in our history books along with the rest of the founding fathers, but when compared to others with more prevalent roles and impacts that shaped the beginning of the United States, George Washington or Thomas Jefferson, for example, it isn't difficult to see how his legacy would be reduced to legal tender and a mention in one's 5th grade social studies class. In 2015, however, this legacy would be changed forever with the introduction of the Tony Award-winning and global musical phenomenon, Hamilton. Created by Lin-Manuel Miranda, the musical tells the story of Alexander Hamilton through a diverse cast and range of musical genres. Featured alongside the show's namesake role of Hamilton are some of America's other founding fathers, but no retelling of Alexander Hamilton's life and legacy would be complete without mentioning the man who brought both to an abrupt end, Aaron Burr. Most of what the public knows about Aaron Burr comes directly from his role in the death of Alexander Hamilton. On July 11th of 1804, after a long-standing series of petty political feuds and disagreements between the two men, they met in New Jersey at the Weehawken dueling grounds. Both were armed with flintlock pistols in the intention of settling their grievances the way many men did in the 18th and 19th centuries, through a duel. Whoever was left unscathed by gunfire would be divinely declared the winner of the dispute. There's a lot of speculation about what actually occurred during this duel, but the most widely accepted version of events, and the one highlighted in the Hamilton musical, is as follows. When it was time to fire, Burr aimed his weapon at Hamilton, while Hamilton aimed his at the sky, signaling his intention to end the duel somewhat amicably. This choice of peace ultimately sealed Hamilton's fate. Burr's shot found its way to his abdomen, and a day later, Alexander Hamilton died of his wounds. Apart from the Hamilton duel, not much is often discussed about Aaron Burr and his impact on American history. This is a disservice to his story, however, as post-duel Burr was involved in another huge scandal that rippled through the country and tested the foundation of law in the fledgling United States. Aaron Burr, founding father and 3rd Vice President of the United States, was tried for treason, and if convicted, his punishment could be death. How did this accusation get brought against Burr? What, if anything, did the state of Kentucky have to do with it? Why am I asking so many questions? All these questions and more will be answered as we explore the Burr conspiracy of 1805 through 1807.
Before we jump directly into the Burr conspiracy, there's some important context to the story that you need to know first. Contrary to the patient and methodical figure that Aaron Burr is depicted as in Hamilton, there is no denying that the real man behind the character was ambitious and eager to make his mark on the world. As a young man in the late 1700s, Burr made multiple career moves to establish himself in the politics of the early United States. At just 19 years old, he paused his legal studies in order to serve in the Revolutionary War. Once the war was over, he resumed his schooling and was admitted to the New York bar. Later, he served as a New York State Assemblyman. This position didn't give him quite the influence that he was looking for, so he aimed higher. Burr was appointed New York State Attorney General just a couple years later. His big success at the federal level came in a 1791 win in the New York race for United States Senator. His opponent was the father-in-law of Alexander Hamilton. As a U.S. Senator, Burr was finally able to be in the room where it happens, and he used his role to push for surprisingly progressive ideals for the time, such as advocating for women's rights and the abolition of slavery. With a newfound confidence in himself, he decided to try his luck in the presidential election of 1796. This was where his upward trajectory appeared to slow, and he lost the election for president, only coming in fourth place. Shortly afterwards, he would also resign from his role in the U.S. Senate. Burr's loss in the election of 1796 and his Senate resignation could have been the end of his political career in the federal government, but he threw his hat in the ring once more for president during the election of 1800. This time, he ran as a Democratic Republican, the same party as Jefferson. Initially, his intention was to serve as Thomas Jefferson's vice president, since Jefferson was the favored member of their political party for the presidency. However, back then, the Electoral College did not differentiate between nominees for president and vice president. They were not running mates like there are today. For America's first few elections, the office of vice president was awarded to the runner-up, which had the potential to make for some awkward and uncomfortable cabinet meetings. Despite being in the same party, this became the case with Jefferson and Burr in 1800. You see, a problem occurred, which is now known as the Burr dilemma. Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson unexpectedly tied in the running for president with 73 electoral votes each. This forced a contingent election in the House of Representatives. To the shock of many, the ambitious and sly Aaron Burr did not concede the race to Jefferson, even though the understood plan within their political party was for Jefferson to serve as president and Burr as his vice president. Seems that when confronted with the potential of power, Burr could not walk away. This was one of the first major public offenses Burr had displayed in his pursuits, as it showcased his willingness to deceive others if that's what it took to reach his goals. And remember this because it will be important and on the test later. With some help from an endorsement from his rival Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson ultimately won the election of 1800 and became the third president of the United States, beating Burr in the 36th round of ballots cast in the contingent election. Aaron Burr's appointment as third vice president of the United States under Thomas Jefferson marked the beginning of the unraveling of his personal and political career. Due to his attempt at sneakily stealing the presidency, Jefferson made it his mission to make Burr vice president in title only. Like a petty fight between schoolmates, Jefferson barred Burr from having any actual influence or impact on decisions made within the presidential office. To make matters worse for Burr, when it was time to plan for the presidential election of 1804, Thomas Jefferson was once more on the ballot for president, and this time with a much more favorable position to win after a relatively successful first term. Having felt the brunt of Jefferson's scorn during the first term, Burr knew that he had no hope of similar success on the presidential ballot of 1804, so he knew it was time for him to switch gears and seek political office elsewhere.
Instead of running at the federal level again, Burr decided during the election of 1804 to try his luck in office at the state level and ran for governor of New York. He lost horribly in his campaign for governor, however, and was now facing the upcoming humiliation of being kicked out of politics at both the state and federal level following the end of his term as vice president. It was maybe due to this humiliation and the failures in Burr's political career that ultimately led to his fatal dueling of Hamilton in the summer of 1804, and for several months after the shooting, he was forced to hide out in the southern states of the U.S. to avoid arrest by the authorities in New York and New Jersey. Shockingly, Aaron Burr eventually was able to make a return to Washington, D.C. to finish out his term as vice president only a few months after his killing of Hamilton. Though the legal systems in New York and New Jersey did charge him for Hamilton's murder, neither were able to officially try him in court, since Burr had fled and hid in a different state. Ultimately, the charges were dropped, and with blood on his hands, Burr was able to continue with life, legally speaking, as if nothing happened. This didn't mean that he was exempt from the court of public opinion, however, and he finished out his vice presidency with the disdain of his peers and constituents. So, what does one do when they have fallen from grace in both their professional and personal life? Most people would probably try and retreat to a quieter lifestyle, hoping to gain back the favor of the public through disappearing into relative obscurity. For Aaron Burr, however, this would not be the road taken. Instead, he would take a turn for the worse. If Burr couldn't land himself a position diplomatically as President of the United States, then he would appoint himself ruler of another land by force. That's right. Aaron Burr concocted a plan to commit treason, and he would do this by plotting to establish his own independent empire in North America, with himself in charge.
In the early 1800s, the United States was mostly concentrated to the east of North America. Within this unsettled land to the west, Burr saw an opportunity to establish his own territory and country outside of the constraints and rules of the American government, many of which he had ironically helped to establish and defended as a lawyer. In particular, he focused his sights on the newly acquired territory of Louisiana, which was already on unfirm ground due to disputes with Spain regarding its borders and whispers of secession from those already settled there. Maybe Burr could successfully take control of Louisiana territory and establish his empire there. And he even planned to expand south to Mexico, where similar disputes about sovereignty resided. It should probably go without saying that one does not simply walk into a plot of land alone and declare themselves as majesty of it without resistance. In order to achieve this most ambitious goal of Burr's yet, he would need allies that could provide weaponry and manpower to form an army. Sly as ever and already discounted by President Jefferson, Aaron Burr leveraged the little power he had as vice president to convince Jefferson that he should appoint then Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Army, James Wilkinson, as governor of the Louisiana Territory. Wilkinson had known Burr from their time serving in the Revolutionary War together, and as governor he could move the military around the West to recruit the forces for Burr's militia plot without arousing suspicion. While Wilkinson used his position as Army commander to travel around the West by land, Burr took to the waterways of the East in pursuit of rousing himself more troops. He traveled up and down the Ohio River many times, trying to garner support in Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Word spread about his antics, eventually reaching the ears of a young man from Kentucky by the name of Joseph Hamilton Daveiss.
If you look at the state flag of Kentucky, you will see an image displayed of a gentleman in a suit shaking hands with a frontiersman clad in animal skin and a raccoon-tailed hat, accompanied by the motto, "United we stand, divided we fall." Joseph Hamilton Daveiss was the quintessential real-life representation of the frontiersman depicted on the flag. Born and raised in the wilderness, Daveiss defied the expectations of those from more established and civilized states. Whip-smart and dedicated to his studies, he was admitted to the Kentucky bar in 1795 at just 21. Although book-smart, he was also a dedicated outdoorsman and reveled in the wild nature of Kentucky's backcountry rather than shy away from it. He was known for riding alone through the backwoods instead of traveling with other lawyers, and would often show up to court dressed in a deerskin suit, while addressing judges with sarcastic titles such as "Your Pomposity" and "Your Stupidity" instead of "Your Honor." Despite his eccentric nature, there was no denying the asset that Joseph Daveiss was when it came to defending the law, and eventually he was appointed U.S. Attorney of Kentucky. When Daveiss had heard the rumors of Burr's plan to seize the Louisiana Territory for himself, he wrote to President Thomas Jefferson to warn him. Despite Jefferson's dislike of Burr, however, he was more concerned with the maintenance of party lines. Burr and Jefferson were both Democratic Republicans, whereas Daveiss was a Federalist. Daveiss sent multiple letters to Jefferson in early 1806 warning the president of Burr's plans, but Jefferson dismissed these claims, chalking them up to being politically motivated and intended to discredit the Democratic-Republican Party. After multiple letters sent and repeated denials, Joseph Hamilton Daveiss resigned himself to the only other option. If he wanted something to be done about Burr, he would have to take matters into his own hands. Using his position of U.S. Attorney of Kentucky to his advantage, Daveiss asked for a court order that would require Burr to appear before a grand jury in Frankfort, Kentucky. He hoped that through an appearance in court, and under penalty for perjury, Daveiss could question Burr about his excursions around Kentucky and the rumors about his plan to seize the Louisiana Territory. If he could prove in a U.S. court within Kentucky, through Aaron Burr's own words, that he had plans to seize territory with an army, then President Jefferson would have no choice but to take Davis's concerns seriously. To Joseph Davis's dismay, however, his request was denied. With both the president and his own local courts dismissing him, what hope remained for Daveiss in his quest to squash Burr's plans of rebellion? In a shocking turn of events, however, despite the court itself denying Davis's court order, Aaron Burr actually agreed to the request. Of his own free will, Burr had shown up to court in Frankfort to answer Davis's questions in front of a grand jury. The details of this legal questioning are murky, but it can be assumed, due to Burr's amicable and voluntary appearance to the court, that he had great confidence of being acquitted from any charges Daveiss tried to bring against him. And that's exactly what happened. Represented by up-and-coming lawyer Henry Clay, yes, that Henry Clay, Burr was able to easily evade whatever Daveiss threw at him. November 1806 is when Burr appeared in Frankfort to be tried for conspiracy to commit treason. And on December 5th, a Kentucky grand jury signed a written declaration exonerating Burr of having committed any activities that would compromise the peace of the country. Though a brief thorn in Aaron Burr's side, Joseph Hamilton Daveiss had ultimately lost.
By the time the trial in Kentucky had concluded, President Thomas Jefferson had finally woken up to the truth that, regardless of the scale, Burr was in fact planning to seize territory with his own militia. Sure, Burr had won in the Kentucky court, but his win was overshadowed by the federal government's attention to him now. His co-conspirator, James Wilkinson, a commander-in-chief of the U.S. Army, had betrayed him. Wilkinson had given Jefferson an encrypted letter that Burr had sent detailing their next moves. Now, the U.S. military, as well as the militias of the states, from whom Burr had been trying to muster recruits, sought to detain Burr. In response, he attempted to fight back with his own dwindling militia, and then, after fleeing, Aaron Burr surrendered to American forces in the Mississippi Territory in late January of 1807. He was arrested on February 19th. Faced with evidence of some kind of conspiracy that couldn't be ignored, the United States Supreme Court officially took Burr to trial. On March 30th, he appeared before Chief Justice John Marshall, who had the difficult task of deciding what exactly Burr should be tried for. It was decided that since the fledgling country's definition of treason wasn't quite applicable to Burr's situation, he would instead be tried for conspiring to invade a nation at peace with the United States. As Burr had not only planned to seize the Louisiana Territory, but also parts of Mexico, he had also technically planned to take territory belonging to another nation. The trial of the United States versus Aaron Burr began on August 3, 1807 in Richmond, Virginia. It lasted slightly under a month, and on September 1st, Aaron Burr was found not guilty under any of the evidence that had been submitted. Burr had gotten away with yet another crime. First, the death of Hamilton, then the possibility of a conspiracy to commit treason, and finally, the attempt to declare himself ruler of a seized land. After the trial in the Supreme Court and his acquittal, Burr was once again a victim of the court of public opinion. He may have been legally dismissed of any wrongdoing, but by then word had spread about his actions and the damage to his reputation was irreparable. He retreated to Europe and lived there for several years until the flames of judgment had cooled down around him, and he returned to the United States in 1812. He opened up a law firm and lived out the rest of his days in relative obscurity until his death in 1836. Aaron Burr was 80 years old.
Thanks for listening to Kentucky Wide. Be sure to subscribe and share if you enjoy it. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a look at the Old Talbot Tavern, a true crossroads not just of Kentucky, but America and even the world.
This podcast comes to you from the Fraser, Kentucky History Museum. We'll be opening our newest exhibit, I Too Am a Kentuckian, on July 4th, 2026. And we've got a full calendar of programs, educational events, summer camps for kids, and more. So stay in contact. And as always, we hope to see you here in beautiful, sunny, downtown Louisville, Kentucky.